Hello and welcome. Carlton have their finals date and opponent confirmed. Exciting times, but last week's game against GWS in the final game of the home and away season didn't create reason for added optimism going into finals. The game felt weird from the get-go. Carlton started well, got Charlie as Coleman, a potential eye gouge happened, and then the hunger of the Giants, who had more to play for, far overwhelmed our drive to win. A huge driver of their win, the turnovers by the Blues that happened with regularity. Whilst this game isn't necessarily one to extract much from, I thought it would be a great time to answer this question. How important is Patrick Cripps actually? Cripps was never going to be able to replicate a Brownlow winning season, and so lost in a supposed decline has been a quietly strong season that had him picked in the extended All-Australian squad. In a stoppage-driven team, Patrick Cripps is the poster boy. Let's run through some 2023 stats. All of these rankings are amongst Carlton players. He's got the third highest player rating for a start, which shows how impactful he really is. That impact can be shown in the following areas. He's number one for contested possessions, clearing Sam Walsh at second. He's got the most clearances, stoppage clearances, and centre clearances. He's number one for ground ball gets, and he has the highest contested possession percentage of any Blue. He averages the most tackles and pressure acts. He's number three for score involvements, and he's number one for disposals per turnover. He's also got one of the lowest tallies for meters per disposal because his kicking efficiency is poor and his kick percentage generally is one of the lowest in the team. He has the most centre bounce attendances, and the next midfielder in this regard doesn't come close. To summarise, Patrick Cripps is really good at this contested footy thing. His high impact stems from his ability to win the footy when it's in dispute and not cough it up. This helps us to break clear from the pressure chamber, and those score involvements he gets arises from that. He actually acts on his strengths because he doesn't kick often for his bad kicking efficiency. Patrick Cripps is so good at what he does and is thus so integral to how Carlton play due to the fact Vossi leans on him for a sizable portion of the game compared to other midfielders who rotate through. Whilst the midfield is prone to change, he remains a constant. Cripper this season is less equals more personified. He hasn't necessarily expanded his skill set, he's probably dumbed it down, but that's probably brought the best out of Cripps. In this game, you saw a player of a similar mould on the opposition who's performed very similarly amongst his teammates in the exact same areas this season. And he had a similar impact, which saw GWS accelerate ahead of Carlton, an excellent stoppage side of course, when it came to clearances, and allowed them to peg back inside 50s and contested possessions when they were disadvantaged early on. This guy goes by the name of Tom Green. We can look at his stats from the weekend and notice that he was a standout. If we compare Cripps and Green, you'll notice what they got from him is practically what we missed. Some things to highlight from me. The meters per disposal, kicking percentage, and efficiency all rank very similarly to Cripps within their respective team lists. His contested ability also clears any other midfielder for the Giants. We could look at clearances for that, the pressure acts he applies, the possessions he wins of that nature. And he's also relied upon by Adam Kingsley for these abilities. Similarly to how Vossi shows the same faith in Cripps through how extensively he's exposed to centre bounces. Let's take this knowledge to game footage and do some observing. I think Mark Pittonet's absence amplified the impact of losing Cripps further. You see, Pitto has the fourth highest hit out to advantage percentage of any ruck, aside from two-gamer Ned Moyle, Samson Ryan, and Mitch Owens. TDK doesn't really thrive in this area. Cripper, as we stated the other week, usually gets first dibs on centre bounce possessions, and we've already brushed over his impact. So without both of those players, the start of a ruck contest through the knockdown and the subsequent Cripps possession looked completely different in this one. With this in mind, the focal point of all our stoppages were gone, and with that, GWS were on the front foot. You see, Carlton opponents play to what Cripps does. They may let him get it, but their sole responsibility is to deny him from having a further impact, usually. In this game, without Cripps, that dynamic changed. This is one example where basically at every point of impact, Carlton players trail Giants players to the footy, so if there's ever going to be a winner if the ball gets out, the Giants are well positioned to benefit. Cripps being present probably changes the attitude of Giants players to be more conservative with how they treat the contest, and simultaneously, it elevates the assertiveness of ours, more confident knowing the chances of the ball being delivered to them. Here's a last quarter example. The early portion of the quarter we were getting smoked, conceding the first 7 inside 50s, having 10 disposals in the first 10 minutes and down 14 contested possessions in the first half of the fourth. This concept was why. Getting the ball is tough and possessing it is not of a nature we'd prefer. That kind of breakaway we usually get at stoppages was rebuffed on a couple of occasions, and the kick is nowhere near the central areas we usually aim for and get success from. Here's a late game example of what could have happened with a Cripps kind of presence. At all points of contact with the footy, we're in front. The Giants never have an opportunity at any point to change the course of the play, but this didn't happen often enough. You also consider the fact Harry was playing ruck, and this just upscaled the problem further. Knowing Tom Green's impact, we often tried to steer clear of where he positioned himself. If it went in his direction, it always gave GWS leverage. The sizing of our players in comparison to theirs were much the same, except for one matchup. That matchup with Tom Green. Whilst George Hewitt is probably the player most comparable to Cripps, as the stats would suggest, he does not do what Cripps does at the same rate. This is one example I highlight where that mismatch caused some problems. Tom Green gets involved on a couple of possessions and prevails in a contested situation. That probably looks a little bit different if you've got Cripps on him as opposed to Dow. This is another example which shows the rewards you reap if you've got a Green type present and the opposition does not. There's a few occasions Carlton players could have time to dispose, but that physical body negates any chance of anything materializing. There's something that sort of takes the same effect with this example. You're sort of seeing a mirror image of Cripps through Tom Green, so reminiscent of how Cripps usually carries himself and maneuvers through the contest. Ironically, this example, which clearly was meant for Green, actually ends up in a goal, but this example was a rare case. There's one scenario where Carlton are most effective, heck, when any team is most effective. When they can adopt possession of the ball ahead of the centre circle or run into that space. Patrick Cripps allows this with the attention he attracts and obviously the outlets he can utilise. Without him, in all contests around the ground, we often were forced backwards, lacking that physically imposing body that could counteract the Giants' relentlessness. Now, I don't know if this was planned, but it was damn smart if it was. We talk about Carlton looking to get the footy here and drive it. GWS had a habit of feeding into that. They decided to get their clearances from the back of the stoppage, so simultaneously they were executing a plan of their own, whilst also having the coverage to negate ours, and it worked successfully, especially with a player like Cripps, who feeds our drives forward unavailable. In this example, you see that coming to life, and with the midfielders trying to push forward, the halfbacks play with the same kind of dare. So GWS getting the clearance in a space which negated any offensive attack for us meant the halfback line was exposed. This example is one which demonstrates what a more physically built player like Cripps could do for opening up the game. The thinking by Walsh here is right, but you would want a Cripps in Walsh's position to ride the Bedford tackle and then draw Green, rather than Walshy looking for an instant give and allowing Green to zone up and block off the passing lane. This is one such case which sort of says what I'm going for with Akers in a similar mould, but GWS obviously were up to it and had more numbers in this situation. This is another example which, if we roll back to what we were talking about, keeping it away from Tom Green, this is why. Cripper is probably not rolling over this easily, and he would rely more on his physicality and back himself to win a tussle with Green and provide a quick give, as his meters per disposal would suggest. Dow is more on the side of using pace to steer clear of a Tom Green tackle and gain meterage. At times, I think our balance was wrong. Ironically, we got some good results from it. Hewitt would occupy central spaces to be the outlet, either helping to continue the chain or kick it himself, whilst Walsh, Chera and others were at the coalface. But a more contested player shouldn't be there. A formulaic approach would ideally have Cripper here, and then Walsh or Chera over here, purely off identifying where their strengths lie. Here is a similar kind of example with Walsh as the extractor, but he does really well here. That physicality is the kind that doesn't come organically like it does with Cripps, as obviously he collects the ball on the ground and is able to stand up whilst getting tackled. Hewitt is the guy that kicks it, and kicks truly. An issue was that in trying to find a Walsh type from the hit out with Cripps out, you've exhausted an outside player you can use at the contest, as we've sort of alluded to. You give a player like Walsh your best chance of getting first use because he works hard and he's obviously got the highest ceiling, but you lose that exact same asset when he has to give it off because he's under pressure. We see the importance of having a player in the mould of Tom Green, and we see the push GWS got from playing behind the footy with our inability to match the physicality, as we've mentioned today. It could have been a goal, but resulted in an almost identical shot to the one Stephen Cornelio got prior. Here's another kind of example which demonstrates the same kind of thing. It's in Walsh's best interest to do exactly what he does, but it would be nice if we had a Cripps at ground level where he can draw the man or take them on and release one of Walsh or Chera with an inside diagonal handball, rather than Walsh taking Cripps's position and locking us into an area along the boundary. I'm not saying Walshy can't take players on, because he essentially does here, but he's not the kind of player to barge through. To add, GWS were able to play counter-attacking football by winning contests up the ground in close, somewhat similar to how Gold Coast tore the team apart in the first quarter and a bit last week. Patty Cripps would have been wonderfully useful to give us first use and either cause a stoppage or swing the footy back in a direction that favours us. This isn't to say that we were awful in this game. The first half provided some good passages when there seemed to be intention in the knockdowns and the movement. The same kind of conviction as if Cripps was there. Here's one example where the intention in the knockdown is pretty difficult to find, but the sidestep by Dow allows that push we love to get at stoppages. And he was a strong part of our early game success. It was this direction in our stoppage work that allowed us to kick 9 goals from stoppages, which is a pretty surprising output, all things considered, for the void Cripps created since he was missing, and for how on top GWS were. So look, if I had to give an answer to the question, how important is Patrick Cripps actually? The answer is, despite all those stoppage goals without him, pretty damn important. Why? Well, he's basically the lifeblood of Carlton's system and is of a mould all midfields need. He is the face of a team who prides themselves off of contested footy, because he is contested footy personified. GWS were far more suited for a win on the weekend from the get-go, because even with Chera and Walsh back in, and yes, I know they were acclimatizing to AFL pace again, they are not Patrick Cripps. It's really that simple. Our midfield had many pieces, just all of the same size. Patty Cripps amends that issue. Thanks for tuning in, and thank you very much for the support on the season. But because the season is done, the analysis videos are not. We will see you, win or loss, for the finals week 1 analysis. All we can do is hope and pray the 22+1 selected do us proud. Thanks again, and bye for now.